So we're carrying on with our discussion of trunking. We've shown you kind of the roundabout way of figuring out which switch ports are trunk. You can go through each of those show interface whatever switch port commands, or there's obviously a much easier command that shows you all of them all at once, show interfaces trunk. And that tells you what switch ports are trunking, the mode they're in this case one is set to automatic and one is set to trunk unconditionally. The encapsulation mode, whether it's trunking or whether it's down, the native VLAN tells you all the information you need to know about what trunk ports are going to which switches and which VLANs are allowed on those trunk ports. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't you just start with this command? It's a lot simpler. Well, it's important to know the background that sort of generates this table that you see here. Besides, I never like doing anything the easy way. So now that we've done with all that, let's actually look at some of the trunking configuration commands at the interface level. So again, go into config mode and we'll do interface fast Ethernet 0/40, just so we don't mess up any of our existing trunks. If we do switch port mode and we hit question mark, you'll notice that in this modern version of the iOS, we can set it to access or trunk, or set trunking mode to dynamically negotiate access or trunk mode. If we were to go over here on this switch and do config T, interface fast Ethernet 04, and do switch port mode, you'll notice we have access, trunk, or multi. We don't have any kind of dynamic desirable, dynamic auto. We don't have any of those commands, and that's why you have to specify on this older model of iOS switch. And I know I keep going back to this, and it's because if you work on any network of any size, you'll run across this, and it'll drive you nuts till you figure out it will never dynamically negotiate a trunk. So we could do dynamic and then hit question mark. There's the auto. Set dynamic negotiation to auto or desirable. Really, the only difference between the two is desirable says, I will absolutely initiate trunking if I'm connected to another switch. Auto says, yeah, if the other guy wants to trunk, then I'll go along with it. The preferred mode for any switch ports is dynamic desirable, if you're going to leave dynamic negotiation on. So let's say we're going to set the switch port mode to trunk. So we go here and we type switch port mode trunk. And there you go. It's now unconditionally in trunk mode. It will never be an access port if you plugged a computer into this trunk port, unless that computer happened to have a network card in it or happened to have software that understood VLAN tags and understood VLAN trunks, you'll never be able to communicate with the rest of the network. So now let's look at some of the commands. If we do switch port trunk question mark, this is where you can set the native VLAN and the allowed VLAN. So if we do allowed VLAN, this is where you can say add VLAN 30 to this particular trunk port. Remove everything except VLAN 5, so on and so forth. We'll get into this command a little more when we talk about spanning tree, because this is really where this command is used when you're designing traffic flow around your network and you don't want to overload a trunk port by forcing it to carry all of the VLAN traffic between two switches. In this case, we'll say switch port trunk allowed VLAN all, which is the default. We'll just hit enter. Now there's one other command that I want to show you that's not supported on the 2950 and 2960 because these switches only support the .1Q trunking. If you happen to run across a switch that supports both the .1Q and the ISL, you may have to set the switch port trunk encapsulation to either .1Q or ISL. Some switches that are newer than this 2900 but older than the 2950 and 2960 that I have has a switch port trunk encapsulation auto where it will auto negotiate the encapsulation mode. And if you have a switch that supports auto negotiation of encapsulation and you set it to switch port mode trunk, it will actually come back and tell you, I can't do trunking until you specifically set an encapsulation mode. And this is where you come in and you say, switch port trunk encapsulation is .1Q or ISL. Like I said, if you're going to talk to other Cisco switches, other modern Cisco switches, or any other non-Cisco equipment, you'll want to use the .1Q since that is the IEEE approved standard. If you have really, really old switches on your network and all they understand is ISL, you can use ISL between them. Obviously, you can't talk to anything else that's not Cisco because ISL is a Cisco proprietary protocol. And that pretty much covers the commands you'll need to know about trunking for the CCNA. And this concludes our discussion of VLANs, VTP, and trunking.